But to kind of warm you all up, for those of us at NEF, retrofitting for us really offers a massive opportunity to transform the lives of millions of people across the UK. We hear a lot about levelling up, about Green New Deal, but to many people, it's very ambiguous. Retrofitting, which is, for those of you who don't know, the process of making our homes warmer, more energy efficient, it's a way of making big ideas like the Green New Deal tangible. Ending the scourge of damp and cold that many councillors on this call will know blights people's lives, putting money back in people's pockets because of our high energy bills. Again, in the context of the current energy crisis, it's real kind of stark how much this work needs doing. Creating thousands of skilled jobs in the process, from teachers to technicians, small businesses. If I think about green politics, my mates don't really know what a green job is. And to be frank, they associate green policies with having to give up something. So climate change is, having your car taken away from you, no more meat, no more holidays. For us at the New Economics Foundation, retrofit is a golden green policy because it's something that isn't taking anything away, right? It's making your house warmer, it's saving you money, it boosts your local economy, it creates jobs. It just happens to help the planet too. And this is how we win a Green New Deal, with changes that are going to improve people's lives. So that's why we think this is like a crucial area that we need to start building on and talking about and organising around. And it's why NEF is really focused on the Great Homes Upgrade. So some very basic info about the campaign. What we are calling to do, and we'll give you a whole pathway of how you can get involved. But we kind of fundamentally understand that there is no path to net zero without retrofitting millions of homes by 2030. So it's not really a question of like whether we can do this work, but when and how. So that means it's a huge opportunity for progressives to shape the plan, to shape the roadmap. It's a huge opportunity for a post-COVID green economic stimulus to revitalise our regions and the local communities within them. So the Great Homes Upgrade is really calling on the government to offer long-term support to local authorities so they can help improve their residents' lives through retrofitting. And we really think, and we'll go into it more on this call, that the local authorities really have to be the engines of this work. The money that gets spent on retrofit, research shows that it has a much higher multiplier effect than investment in roads, investment in electricity production, investment in trains. This is something that can really boost our local economies, and through making sure that it's happening by local authorities and with the kind of skills and practice of the public sector, we're going to be able to create kind of really important regeneration of areas that have been kind of left behind. So we're calling on local government to ask the government to offer long-term support to local authorities so they can basically help get this retrofit revolution off the ground. The kind of fiscal asks, and we'll go into those in a bit more detail in this event, are for 11.7 billion for retrofitting over the next 3 years as part of the government spending review, and a demand from Boris Johnson to commit to retrofitting 19 million homes by 2030. And we think this is only going to happen if the government sets up a specific retrofit task force to help build the skills and expertise necessary to kickstart off the process. Because if we wanted to start tomorrow, we just wouldn't have enough people skilled up and able to do the work. So it has to be kind of properly planned out. And we're also asking local authorities to do this so they can start building the skills and supply chains necessary within their own areas to get this work started. And we also want you to all get your local authorities or combined authorities to sign up to the campaign and come out and support the Great Homes Upgrade. We've been working with local authorities that have been doing this work for a number of years. They've got amazing results out of it, and you'll hear from one of them today. But we want more local authorities to start to understand how important this work is going to be over the next decade, and to get them to publicly come out and support the Great Homes Upgrade as well. And we'll direct you to our website to how you can get that happening. And later on, we'll be doing a large kind of community organising strategy around this work, which will happen in November. And I'll go through more of the details about that at the end of the call. So I'll quickly run through the kind of how today's going to plan out and the speakers we've got. What I'll do is I'm going to have a speaker to speak first, and then I'm going to get you guys to ask some questions. So please put questions into the chat during the speakers. Instead of waiting till the end and having all the questions at once, we're going to have a chance for you to ask questions directly to the speakers after they've spoken. So first we're going to hear from NEF's own CEO, which is Miata Fambule, and she's going to be talking about why this campaign is so important and why NEF are getting involved in it. Then we're going to hear from Councillor Helen Hayden, who's a cabinet member for infrastructure and the environment in Leeds, someone who's been pioneering the best practice on retrofit at the local level. Then we're going to hear from Jamie Driscoll, who's a Metro Mayor in North Tyne Combined Authority, about what Metro Mayors can be doing. And then finally, the amazing Jonathan Atkinson from Carbon Co-op. Carbon Co-op is an energy service and advocacy cooperative that helps people and communities make radical reductions in their home carbon emissions. The aim is to kind of finish around 1:15, and we're going to ask people, if you can, to tweet the hashtag Great Homes Upgrade, and then take questions to ask them at the end. I will at the end go through some of the more details about organising around this. So I'm not a researcher myself, I'm an organiser. And for me, the most exciting thing about being able to work at NEF and organise around this is making this about a public demand for this work. Because at the moment, retrofit is a technocratic term. It's a technocratic term. It's seen as something that happens from the top down. Many people might not actually know kind of what it means and what it can do for their community. Whereas actually, when you go out and speak to people, it's the kind of thing you should be demanding from your local authority. It's the kind of thing we should be demanding from the government. Like it's unacceptable that people live in cold, damp conditions. And from a personal perspective, and not to get too soft, but I remember as a kid the drastic difference when my parents split up was I remember it suddenly being cold, because it was the first time in my life that my parents had to think about when they could turn the heating on, because a bit of a financial, when parents split up, that's what happens. I remember that feeling of being cold in my own home. Thousands and thousands of people across the country feel that way for no reason at all. And if we can marry up our ideas about the green economy and climate change with those basic human demands of like not having to live with damp and cold in your home, then I think that is the future for progressive politics. I think that is what young people want to get involved in. I think that's what older people want to get involved in. I think that's what people who know about the climate and those who don't will all be able to unify around. So as an organizer, it's incredibly exciting, but we can talk a bit about that at the end. First, I'm going to pass it over to Miata, who's the CEO of the organisation I run for, a phenomenal economist, and many of you will know her. So Miata, take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Hayden, and welcome everyone. Really, really excited to be with you this afternoon. I always try and start with where we are. I always try and start with the context to locate the work that we're doing and the work we want to do with others. And I want to get the same today, to try and give a sense of why I think there is both urgency for a Great Homes Upgrade, but also I think actually the space and the window for us to win this feels more tangible and more possible than it has done before. You will all know that we are feeling the aftershocks, the economic aftershocks of the pandemic. It's going to be with us long after the pandemic has ended. And, I think as we start to turn our mind to the question of the recovery, we look back at the last 18 months. We look back at the fact that, last year, the UK economy was one of the hardest hit, shrunk by about 10%, sharpest annual contraction for 300 years. We are still expecting, despite the furlough scheme, to see rising unemployment, and we know it's going to hit certain sectors really hard. We're expecting a big squeeze in incomes. It was happening anyway. The Office for Budget Responsibility was projecting by 2026, average wages would only be at 2008 levels. And on top of that, we're seeing rising fuel bills, we're going to see rising food bills, and a huge cost of living crisis. So I think the challenge for us as we think about every aspect of policy, including this, is actually we need to think about how we not just deal with the fundamental and huge, profound impact of the pandemic in economic terms, but actually many of the deep-seated problems that the pandemic has exposed. And for me, no greater than the lesson that we've learned about the untold cost, the suffering of not preparing properly for natural crises. And I think the parallel with climate change is absolutely clear. And the thing that it has shown us is actually when these crises come, they can hit us in such a profound way that will change absolutely everything. And I think if we had any doubts about this when we were talking about climate change before, I think the pandemic has shown this to us in blazing lights and creates an imperative for us to respond now. I think when I sort of think about the story about the recovery, the thing that gives me hope and the thing that I think locates the Great Homes Upgrade is I think everything that we've learned in the last 18 months, everything that the pandemic has shown, all the vulnerabilities that has exposed, I think has crystallized in the public mood that we need change. I think the debate is shifting. I think the polling is showing that the public want to see change. They want to see change in their communities. They want to see change in their lives. They want us to respond to the big challenges that we face. But critically, I also think we're seeing change in the political spectrum. You know, the Prime Minister says we want to build back better. He says we need a new deal. He says this is the age of net zero. Like, how much of this is rhetoric versus reality, I don't know. But I do know that he is responding to a public hankering for something to be different coming out of this moment. The Labour Party are talking about this as a 1945 moment, and I think they're right. There is a sense that things have to be changed. And for me, you know, the question that then raises to us is, as we think about how we recover, as we think about how we rebuild local economies, how do we do that in a way that just doesn't take us to where we were before, but looks to deal with the twin challenges of climate change in a real and visceral and obvious way, but also looks to the question about how do we make people's lives better at the other side of this. We've spoken a lot about the Green New Deal. We don't see a pathway to the recovery without a Green New Deal. You know, the New Economics Foundation was amongst a whole lot of organizations about 10 years ago that were calling for a Green New Deal before it was fashionable. And the idea is a really simple one. An unprecedented mobilization of resources targeted at communities to decarbonize the economy at pace whilst creating hundreds of thousands of jobs, reviving and breathing life into places and lifting living standards across the country. But to deliver this project, to deliver a Green New Deal, we need long-term commitment to public sector investment that can crowd in private sector investment. And, you know, when we have a position where you have everyone from the IMF, the UN, the OECD, all saying to governments across the world, look, this is the time to continue investing. For me, the question is, if you have governments that are going to pump resources into the economy, why not do it in a way that is green? So that we're responding to the current crisis in a way that sets us up for the next big thing. We were delighted to see the commitment from the Labour Party, 28 billion a year in greening the economy over the next 10 years. This is absolutely where Labour should be. But for us, actually, this scale of investment should not be contested across the political spectrum. We need cross-party commitment that absolutely we will have long-term investment in order to do the heavy lifting of greening the economy. And this is where the campaign for the Great Homes Upgrade comes in. We think that this is a wedge issue. We think that this is an issue that will garner public support, that will build political momentum around the Green New Deal. And we don't just say this, as Hayden has said, because actually there is no route. There is absolutely no route to net zero without decarbonizing our homes. You know, we know we've got 90 million homes that are in desperate need of upgrading because they're below EPC level C. We know that the Climate Change Committee is estimating that we need something in the region of 250 billion until 2050 to decarbonize UK's housing stock. And yes, a chunk of this will come from the private sector, but it will not happen unless the public sector steps in, takes the lead, and crowds in the private sector. And yet, despite all of that, despite the fact we know all of this, the policy response to date has been woefully inadequate, and this has to change. And this is squarely the focus of the campaign. But I think for me, it's more than the imperative around climate change. It's more than the imperative to green our economy, which we know is absolutely critical. I think this potentially becomes a tangible way in which we can show people the upside of greening the economy, in which we can show people the upside of the green transition, and show that, you know, for those of us that argue that this is the only pathway, in the end, you know, for us, the Green New Deal is something powerful because on the other side are better communities, better places, people's living standards improve. But this becomes quite a tangible way in which we can show people this. And then through this, hopefully garner the support that we need for the bigger campaign. I think the other side of it for me, though, is that, you know, in a world where people have spent a lot of time cooped up in their homes over the last 18 months, the importance of having decent, warm, comfortable homes, just a basic right, feels more tangible and urgent than it's ever before. And it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you live. No one wants to go to a home that's cold, that's damp, that's drafty. No one wants to rely on fossil fuels that pollute their climate, that pollute their communities, that pollute their atmosphere. So for me, people want this change, but many of us aren't able to achieve this change alone. And I think this is where the campaign is potentially hugely powerful. And our end goal through all of this is that we ensure that everyone, absolutely everyone, has a home that is warm, a home that is well insulated through green, clean energy. So 7 million homes upgraded by 2025, that's our first target. 90 million homes upgraded by 2030. But we know that to achieve this, we've got to get the government to commit to additional public sector investment. Hayden said 11.7 billion over the course of this parliament. And we think if they can do this, this will then unlock a further 18 billion from the private sector if we combine it with tax incentives and regulations and other interventions to unlock private finance. Critically, there have been many attempts at retrofitting. We will be squarely arguing that the way that we do this is that we push this investment down to the local level and allow local authorities working with their partners to deliver this neighborhood by neighborhood, area-based interventions. We've had lots of different attempts at retrofitting. We know this works. We know that it can garner communities around this, but critically, it gives us the chance to say, we're not just going to go in and retrofit your homes, but alongside that, we're going to be putting on additional interventions to try to shape and improve and build the look and feel of places. And for me, if we can pull this off, and it is a big if, but if we can pull this off, we not only deliver a big investment that will boost local economies, we not only create 500,000 jobs, but critically, we look to build the skills of people in our local economies in order to take up this job. Now, we're excited about this campaign. We think this is the issue that will allow us to make big progress in terms of decarbonisation, but will allow us to tell a story about what decarbonisation means for people in communities that feels real and tangible. But we absolutely know that we cannot do it on our own. The campaign will only live and breathe and win if we do it in partnership with others. So we hope that through today, we can reach out to colleagues across local government, we can reach out to colleagues across communities to say, join us. Join us in pushing the Treasury in order to make that investment commitment. Join us in order to get political voices across the political spectrum saying, this is a must. The times demands it, the opportunity is there, and the win, not just for climate change, but the win for our communities, the win for our economies, the win for people's homes is there, it's within our grasp, and we must absolutely reach for it. I believe with all my heart that this is winnable. I think we will look back in 5 years' time and said, we did this, we won this, and this was the first step towards a Green New Deal. But we absolutely cannot win this without the support of others. So we hope that by the end that you will join us, and we hope that together we can land the win in the spending review, but use that as a first step for the bigger push to get 90 million homes retrofitted by 2030. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Miata. Just a bit of technical apologies to those who joined late because of our confusion around the Zoom link, but thank you all for joining us, and we're glad you got in to see that, because that was absolutely brilliant. Miata, I'm going to direct some questions to you kind of straight away. So we've got a question from David Murray, which is, the question always asked is where's the money going to come from? He's also put in a really helpful bit of information, which is that 2020 Vivid Economics report commissioned by the WWF says for every £1 spent on low carbon investment, the returns are 3 to 8 times the initial investment. So could you talk about a bit more about how the Great Homes Upgrade would be funded over that that decade period, rather than just the initial fiscal commitment? And then we've got one from Andrew, which is what's NEF's suggested plan? You should go check out Chaitanya's report, which is on our website, but I think it's to kind of talk through like maybe a bit of the kind of next couple of months might hold. And then there's one from Les, which is, as Meta said, an adequate retrofitting program must change everything, as in the campaign's 5 points around public sector. what kind of political force and disruption could compel the government to reverse the direction, the fact that, you know, they seem to be holding a kind of neoliberal position at the moment. So what kind of political force and disruption could compel the government to reverse the direction that they're in at the moment? So three quite big questions.
Just little ones for an afternoon. Fantastic questions. So where's the money coming from? Because that is the number one question. Now, we are unashamedly saying that a big chunk of it has to come from public investment. We don't see a route to accelerating the path of retrofitting without it. And all the evidence that we have suggests that actually if the government can unlock that, that will unlock private sector investment, but critically, there are multiplier effects and benefits that will come out of that. I think the second part of it is that if we can get that down payment from the public sector, which, by the way, all other countries, look across the US and Biden, are clocking the same thing and making the same commitment. But if we can unlock that, we think the second proportion has to come out of private investment. And that will be a combination of individuals paying. So whether it is the landlords having to do their bit to upgrade their homes, whether it's individuals having to do their bit to upgrade their homes. Part of the answer to that is how do you create, you know, financial products that makes that possible? So we're looking at things like green mortgages that would allow people in order to kind of borrow and pay back in the long term. We've had lots of different iterations of this, all of them in the end hampered by the Treasury that have never skewed the incentives so that it feels like it's worthwhile for people to do it. And then I think the third part of it is, you know, the government is in the process of setting up the National Infrastructure Bank. We think that a big part of what they should be doing is thinking about how they lend, for example, to local authorities in order to enable them to free up some of the capital to front load some of the cost of this, making it more palatable for people. So it feels like it's got to be a three-way partnership. The public sector has to do some of the heavy lifting. We need to get private finance that, you know, say that they want to invest in this stuff, but the products aren't there to do it. And then some of it will have to be through individuals, but we've got to make it feel affordable, we've got to make it manageable, and we've got to ensure that those that can pay, but actually for a huge swathe of people who don't, they are subsidized by the public sector. I think that has to be the deal. I think on the question about the political forces and how we shift them, I mean, it's interesting looking at the government because they are schizophrenic on this. The rhetoric around net zero, and I don't actually think it's net zero rhetoric, because I think generally, and I'm told that it goes up to the Prime Minister, I'm told it goes up to the Chancellor, they want net zero to be part of their legacy. They get the imperative of this, they get the importance for this. I think where, if you like, there's a dividing line is they haven't fully grasped the fact that there is no cheap way to net zero and it requires investment. And all the regulation in the world will get you part of the way, but it won't get you the full way. And so you've got to commit to doing that. And then I think the second is, you know, there is a very simple technocratic path to net zero, but that leaves lots of our communities worse off. And, you know, we argue that you cannot do this in a way that's just, you cannot do this in a way that doesn't take people with you, but make their lives better. And again, unless the government is willing to not just invest, but do things in a different way, we don't get there. How do we change them? I think we demand it. You know, I think why for me this campaign is potentially so powerful is that if you can get people saying, actually, we want this, yes, because it's good for the climate, but more importantly, it's good for our lives. It's good for our lives today. And we want governments at every level to respond to that. I think that demand is the most powerful thing. And the one thing that we know about this government is that literally they don't go a day without polling. And so if they hear from the public that this is important, if they hear from the public that this is something that people say is bread and butter and you have to deliver, they will respond. And I come back to the point I say about the context. I think the times are changing, the mood is changing, the tide is changing. And I think it's forcing our politics to be more ambitious than it would otherwise. You know, I think what felt like the mainstream 3 years ago is no longer the mainstream now. So that clamor for something different, public support, and the fact that actually as we reach to solve these really difficult questions, governments have to innovate. They're going to have to act and respond differently. I think that's the thing that gives us the hope for shifting the tide. Aiden, I haven't answered the second question. Remind me again what it is.
So the second question was to do with basically, what kind of disruptions could compel the government to reverse the kind of the current direction that they're going in? I guess you kind of addressed it, that there's a they care about polling, right? And I think, you know, NEF has just done some internal polling which suggests that 65% of people in the UK support retrofitting. You know, only 7% oppose the policy. There's a kind of clear electoral desire to kind of like, you know, that we can pressure on. But is there anything around kind of where are the pressure points, do you think?
Yeah, so again, a really good question. So I think part of it is the politics and where the public are, which is why I think campaigns that look to win the hearts and minds of the public are so critical. But I think the second is just the reality of climate change. And you know, you look at the floods that we saw across Europe, you look at the floods that we've had here, you know, look at the wildfires. I think for a long time, policymakers knew that this was an urgent question, a problem and a question that they had to confront, but there was a sense that we had time. And yes, parts of the global south were burning, but we had time. I don't think that time horizon holds anymore. I think events will force their hand. And, you know, our argument has always been, you're going to have to pay. You will have to pay one way or another. It's whether you pay in response, whether you pay trying to map up the chaos, or whether you pay at the start in a deliberate, in a proactive way that looks to mitigate and manage this. And I think that argument is the penny's starting to drop. And I think events are going to force that. So, you know, for me, the three disruptions are this 1945 moment and the fact that it's all up in the air and all to play for. I think the realities of climate, which is no longer a thing of the future, it is the thing of the here and now. And I think the public. And if we can bring those three things together, I think that's how we start shifting the dial.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Miatta. We are now going to move on to Councillor Helen Hayden. Helen Hayden was one of the first councillors we met at the start of our kind of journey into talking to local authorities. And we were just incredibly impressed by the way she talked about the work she's been doing in Leeds. So we're really excited to have you here, Helen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I feel a bit of pressure now to high expectations. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. And I am extremely passionate about what we're doing in Leeds and also what needs to be done as well. So I apologise if I get a little bit too passionate when I'm speaking. But I don't know how many of you know Leeds, but we are, you know, the second biggest unitary authority in the country, and a growing city of nearly 800,000 people. And we have a superb heritage of industrialisation and manufacturing and of innovation as well. And it's those Victorian housing that we have such a lot of in our city, that and our social housing as well, that we're really passionate about bringing into the 21st century and making lives better for people, which we've heard about so far. I live in the area that I represent, and I'm incredibly lucky that I live in a beautiful Victorian 5-bedroomed terrace house. And the boiler went last January, and I had the kids at home homeschooling, and I was trying to work, and I was also trying not to replace my gas boiler. And after 3.5 weeks, I gave up because it was just too expensive. There's too many barriers for me to get in electric form of heating that I could possibly retrofit with solar panels in the future. And the day that the plumber arrived to fit my boiler, I got offered, the leader phoned me and offered me this job. And part of my job is infrastructure and climate. And so a huge part of my job is dealing with the climate. But I also have housing growth, and I also have city development in my portfolio as well, the roads and planning as well. So as a coal miner's granddaughter, I never been cold. My mother refused to live in a cold house because she'd been brought up in a house heated by coal. And so the first thing she did when my parents bought a house in Leeds was to fit central heating before the winter set in. And it's that experience that I want for everybody else living in Leeds, but I know that that's just not the case, especially with a lot of our housing stock. So we've already, as Hayden said, we've already started and had real success with our retrofitting. Our old Victorian back-to-backs that house some of our most vulnerable and poorest, most deprived people in the city, who are paying rent to private landlords or indeed own the house, but can't find it very difficult to heat it. We did, there was a study done, and before we went into the houses and retrofitted them, which makes them look really much better on the outside. The ambient temperature inside on the February, and it was tested again February late the year after, rose from 12 degrees Celsius to 18 degrees Celsius. If you've got a home at 18 degrees Celsius that is not drafty, is not losing heat, is retaining that heat, you do not need to put your heating on, or you only need to put it on for a very small period of time. So that means that your energy bills go right down, that you're not worried about paying your energy bills. And that in turn means that you've got more money in your pocket for food. So in one fell swoop, we are improving homes, reducing fuel bills, and therefore putting money in people's pockets. So tackling fuel poverty, and then also food poverty. We're tackling a deprivation of children who live in those homes with their parents, who and carers. They're now warm, like I said about, and my father talks about growing up in a cold house. They can do their homework in their bedroom. They can access all those other things that you want to enjoy life, because your parents and carers have got some more money in their pocket, because their biggest bill isn't their heating bill. So, and that was a really hard work, but we, working with landlords, working with private homeowners, not everyone got involved, but the benefits were then tangible, and it's really, really good to see. And the before and after photos of just how the houses look is incredible. So we're moving on to, we've got 4.1 million, from the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund to fund innovative whole house improvements to make 190 council homes net zero, carbon net zero. This will involve super insulation to walls and roofs, high performance windows and doors, and renewable technologies such as air source heat pumps and solar PV. And the contractor will focus on high quality detailing to minimise code bridging and heat loss, and be carefully monitored to demonstrate that we've got those savings achieved. And those tangible benefits will come to those people living in there. So I'll just tell you a little story, because we've also got a district heating scheme, which was very innovative, and it uses, and I know some people don't like it, but the incinerator that burns our black bin waste, and then provides heat to heat water, which now heats 12,000 of our flats, which have also been retrofitted as well. And that has reduced the tenants' bills by 50% against their old electric storage units as well. So, and we've now got our civic buildings coming online, the hospital are signed up, and the private sector. So Mattia said about unlocking that private investment. We've now got private developers wanting to connect to our district heating network. It's a safe, reliable, low carbon and low cost way to heat a building. And so we're unlocking that private investment and that private money as well. So I'll tell you a story about, and he's our current Lord Mayor, my colleague, Councillor Khan, and he at scrutiny meeting talked about a lady he met in who lives in one of the high rise in his one of the most deprived wards probably in the country, but definitely in Leeds. And she said that every December she has to choose between fuel or food, and last December she didn't have to make that choice. She could enjoy Christmas because her fuel bills were 50% lower, her flat was warm and retained heat, and it was more controllable, and and just her life was much more pleasant. And if we're going to bring people with us, people who struggle every week to put food on the table, or every year to put food on the table, parents who are struggling, awake at night, wondering how they're going to feed their kids the next day, they're not going to get involved in climate change. But if you tell them that by tackling climate change, we can tackle fuel poverty, we can tackle food poverty, we can give them more money in their pocket, which makes economic sense, because they will then go out and spend that money on their children, in shops, in the local economy, which means more jobs. And it means just a better standard of life all round, which is good for our communities and good for our economy as well, and good for the city. So we're working really hard in Leeds to join it all up together. So when we improved our city centre, we laid the district heating pipes at the same time. It takes a lot of partnership working, but it's so worth doing, and it takes that vision as well. But the major challenges we've got is funding, as has already been mentioned. We're in this process where you have to bid for funding. It sets local authority against local authority. In about a week's time, we're going for more decarbonisation money. We know that when that opens on that morning, we have to be there. It's like, I don't know, phoning in on a Saturday morning kids' TV show in the old days. And I know that the website will crash. I know that it's first come, first served. So we're trying to beat all these other cities and all these local authorities. And then we've got the criteria problem. We've passed 2035, means that our Victorian terraces, we can't dig down in front because that would make the pavements too narrow. So if you go inside to do the damp course, it makes it very difficult for the tenant, and also it makes the windows too small. So our space windows and natural light, that's all difficulty. Landlords were mentioned. Has to be policy that is particular to each area of the country, because if you're asking landlords to spend thousands, and I was prepared to spend thousands on my house if the government matched it. I signed up for that green grant, would have been great. I spent 5,000, they spent 5,000. I could just about afford that, or borrow it if there was a scheme. But somebody even on my income, which is good for Leeds, can't afford to retrofit my home. If you've got landlords who the property is worth £100,000, they're not going to spend £20,000, £30,000 to improving that property. It's not the same as in London, where your property might be worth £500,000. So we need to look at different areas of the country and have a package and finance deals that will help the privately owned buildings and help the private owners improve their house, improve their homes and their buildings. So we've got so we need long-term sustainable funding. Yes, give us criteria. Yes, ring fence it, but don't make us bid for it. I've got brilliant officers who spend time writing bids instead of actually delivering the work on the ground. And we know we can do it in Leeds. We've proved that we can deliver in Leeds, that we can make our residents' homes warmer, safer, more sustainable, and their lives better. We need that long-term, and we need that skills as well that I talked about. And this is going to be so good if we can win this. It's going to be so good for the Leeds economy. We'll go back to 200 years when we were innovating, where we were inventing, and we'll do it with the green. We've got the vision, Leeds City Council. We just need that public funding, sustainable long-term funding to unlock and unlock the potential of our young people and upskill people, reskill people, and bring that whole new green economy to Leeds. We were one of the powerhouses in the Industrial Revolution. We can do that with the Green Revolution as well. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Really inspiring note to end on as well, Helen. I've got two questions for you. I'm going to have to ask you to keep it within 3 minutes because we're already running over and there are loads of questions in the chat. But the two questions I've got is, one, how have residents responded to the work? Like, what have this been the kind of feedback? And then a second one from Charlie, who I know is literally zooming in from a building he is retrofitting at the moment, which is about training. So what is Leeds doing to kind of train people up? And I know that Charlie's wants to make sure there's not a one size fits all. You know, you should be training people on the job. That it can't just be all in the classroom. So I was wondering what the training schemes have been like in Leeds.
We're working. So I'll take the second question first. So we're working with Leeds City College. We're actually one of the few. In my day, it was called the Leeds College building. And the redevelopment of the South Bank is becoming our education quarter, and it's where Tetley's Brewery was, and so and the print works where we train our caterers, and the Leeds College building, it's all a part of Leeds City College. Really proud of our colleges, and they're very hands-on. So we're working really closely with them. We've got a low carbon food event tomorrow where we're working with Leeds City College, their catering side, because about the low carbon of food. So we're doing the same in terms of getting the skills for the future with Leeds City College. They're a key partner. We're actually in November, we're having a kind of a Jobs and Skills Week in the green economy, going into schools, going around the city, telling people just the sheer range of jobs that are available within the green economy as well. So it's about getting that word out. It's about informing people and telling them how they can access. We also have Situ in the city centre, building zero carbon homes on site in an old industrial part of the city, and they the miles are zero because they build the homes on site, and they're employing local people to do that as we speak. So we're working with the private sector, we're working with Leeds City College, and getting the message out there ourselves. What's the response from residents? Initially, they don't want you coming into their house, they don't want the disruption. When they see how it comes out, so some people who refuse then saw what happened to other people's houses and said, we want a bit of that actually. And you heard from that lady that it just made her life so much happier, so much better. So sorry for going on too much.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was brilliant. Now we're going to hear from Jamie Driscoll, who has filmed a kind of short video for us. So hopefully the tech all works out. But we're going to hear from Metro Mayor Jamie Driscoll, who's one of the many Metro Mayors who we are signing up to the Great Homes Upgrade. So Ferg, feel free to share the video. It's always a bit fiddly with these things. Here we go.
The climate emergency is now on the political agenda in a big way. But does the rhetoric match the reality? Do the targets and the 10-point plans measure up? No, they don't. Multinational oil companies are still drilling new wells. We're still building new homes dependent on fossil fuel heating. Yet subsidies for renewable energy were axed. Some good things are happening, they really are. But the PR machine goes into overdrive. All the glossy greenwash in the world won't stop climate change. Even if the public are kidded by the headlines, the planet won't be. The laws of physics cannot be changed by rhetoric. And while individual responsibility certainly plays a large part, the coordination of a large-scale change can only be done by government intervention. I've been the North of Tyne Mayor for 2 years and 4 months, and from a standing start we've invested 25 million in growing the offshore renewables industry, 18 million in our Green New Deal fund for commercial spaces to generate solar energy and improve energy efficiency. As an organisation, we're on track to be net zero as soon as the trees we've planted have grown and sequestered carbon. And we've landed the UK's first gigafactory manufacturing electric batteries to decarbonise Britain's vehicle fleet. We're investing in mine water heating to turn our high carbon past into a low carbon future. We already have 4,197 new jobs in the pipeline, with thousands more to come. All backed by our Good Work pledge, which guarantees the real living wage, fair contracts, trade union recognition, in-work skills training and mental health support at work. We're putting millions into training people with new skills, including £2 million just transition training for people moving from high carbon industries into new low carbon jobs, so that no one is priced out of getting the skills they need for a prosperous future. This is the Green New Deal in action, now. If I can do all this in 2 years from a standing start, imagine what national governments can do with their resources. Because there's a massive gap that only central governments can step in to fix. It's the heat we waste from our homes, the carbon we release heating water. There is no route to net zero that does not deal with our homes. And there is no route to zero poverty that doesn't deal with our homes either. Now, I don't have to tell you the moral case for everyone having a secure home that's warm and affordable, where parents aren't worried because their babies are coughing in the winter, where pensioners aren't faced with a choice between heating or eating. With existing housing stock, there is no one-size-fits-all simple solution. We need to make sure that we're not heating water or homes from fossil fuels, but it's not easy to put a heat pump in an upstairs flat or to insulate old brickwork that has no cavity wall. That's why my authority, the North of Tyne Combined Authority, has commissioned the Energy Savings Trust to develop a robust evidence base to support the design of a large-scale housing retrofit programme for the North of Tyne region. This will include the provision of a database of the energy efficiency of the housing stock across all tenures and a dashboard to support the analysis of the data. The housing stock baseline will be used to create a funding options report that will include estimates of green job creation associated with retrofitting the homes across the North of Tyne. We're also designing a new delivery framework to access and procure the professional services and contracting services to deliver large-scale, low-carbon retrofit programs. This means that we'll be ready as soon as the funding becomes available. And this will cost money, whether as a society we do it or not. Because homes that leak energy cost money. Destroying our planet's habitability costs money. It costs us a fortune in treating preventable health conditions. In 2016, a pilot in the Northeast found that insulating the homes of patients with chronic pulmonary diseases cut the number of GP admissions by 60% and the number of hospital admissions by 30%. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. There are many ways to raise the money. For socially owned housing, the government just needs to stump up the cash. And there are 13 million people in the UK who rent from a private landlord. That's doubled since the year 2000. We pay an astonishing 22 billion a year in housing benefit. Without that state subsidy, the private rented business model would collapse. A simple scheme that allows local and regional authorities to mandate landlords to insulate their homes, to swap out gas boilers for electric or heat pumps where it's feasible, would slash emissions, improve health and save on heating bills. If we had the power to offer landlords and homeowners a retrofit now, pay later scheme, we could start fixing this problem immediately. Pay for the work up front and put a charge on the property, just like a mortgage extension, so when it's sold, the cost is repaid. Everybody wins. Tenants get warmer, healthier homes and lower bills. Property owners get an increase in the value of their property and they suffer no cash flow pressures. Britain gains thousands and thousands of good green jobs and the planet sees a reduction in carbon emissions. The New Economics Foundation's campaign for a Great Homes Upgrade asks local and regional leaders to commit to 5 things. Number 1, write to Treasury asking for 11.7 billion for retrofitting over the next 3 years. Well, retrofit is already in our comprehensive spending review submission, so we're doing that. Number 2, set up a local retrofit task force to kickstart the process of developing the skills and expertise to make this a reality. And I spoke earlier about how we're doing this. And 3, 4 and 5, share best practice, ask other local authorities to join the campaign and sign the petition. And I'm asking you to do that right now. Retrofitting our houses to be warm, healthy and affordable is a key part of the just transition to a zero carbon, zero poverty future.
Amazing as always from good old Jamie. I love the fact that he You could tell that was a curated bookshelf. Look at all the comrades that were in the background. It was amazing. Well done, Jamie. And I think the thing that is really exciting about having Jamie on board is this conversation is happening amongst the Metro mayors, and really importantly amongst those who are not. This is a Labour Party fringe event, but this has to be cross-party. We have to get buy-in from local authorities across the country, and I think the Metro mayors are really starting to do that work, because within their own patches there are lots of different interests at play. So I think it's fantastic to have them on board with the campaign. I'm going to jump straight away to Jonathan because we are time is of the essence. Jonathan, really interested to hear from you and the work that Carbon Co-op have been doing.
Yeah, I feel embarrassed not to have a bookshelf behind me now, full of well-chosen books. Thanks very much for asking us to speak today. We're a fantastic admirer of the New Economics Foundation and all the work that you do. And indeed, I've worked with NEF many years ago now, but a big supporter of the work. I'm going to talk about three things quite briefly, really. I'm going to talk about government in action and how that creates an opportunity for both community and municipal action in this area. I'm going to talk about what can be done and what is possible, even now, without that support from government. And then I'm going to offer a few thoughts about local authority action. And it was great to hear from both Helen and from Jamie on what's happening in those areas. And indeed, my colleagues at URBED are working on that social housing decarbonisation fund work in Leeds. So it's fantastic to hear Helen's perspective on it. In terms of government action, well, I mean, Niata talked about it and some of the other speakers as well, but really, and it's been talked about in the chat as well, really, there's been no government policy in this area since 2012, 2013, the Green Deal, which crashed and burned legendarily fairly quickly after its launch. And we're really seeing the legacy of that lack of inaction, lack of policy, lack of thinking, really, in the recent gas crisis, and the fact that we are too vulnerable, we are too exposed to gas because we haven't addressed heating, energy efficiency, and because organisations, companies like British Gas successfully lobbied for the green crap to be cut by David Cameron and such in that period, 2012, 2013. That lack of thinking, lack of strategy was only kind of illustrated more greatly last year with again, Green Deal on steroids, the Green Homes Grant Scheme, launched with a great deal of fanfare. Our knowledge is that it was announced by the Treasury before BEIS, the department in charge of delivering it, was even told about it. So they had very little time to prepare. The scheme was obviously botched, and it quickly failed. And the real tragedy there was that the Green Homes Grant Scheme wasn't a 10-year program or a 15 or a 20-year program, because those are the kinds of timescale we need to be planning along, and those are the kinds of timescales that the private sector, the public sector, the third sector need to be able to invest in this area, really. So yeah, it is a bit of a wasteland government policy, and we're pending the Buildings Decarbonisation Fund strategy. That was due for release in the summer. It's still not here. Our information is that the lure of hydrogen and home heating hydrogen has kind of derailed that strategy. I think it's apparent to mostly everyone that that's illusionary now, and really it's too costly and too impractical to use hydrogen. So hopefully we will see a strategy soon. But all that inaction and inactivity leaves an opportunity for local authorities, for social enterprises and the third sector and the community sector to take action and demonstrate what is possible. And that's why it was great to hear from Helen and from Jamie and from others. I would like to move on and secondly say what has been done and what is there out there. And I'd say over the past 10, 15 years and longer even, the legacy of the work that Carbon Co-op and others have been doing, many others I should say, has demonstrated both that retrofit is possible, that we have all the technologies, processes, skills, and such that we need to retrofit homes in place. It's not like we need to invent some new magic technologies. Everything we need is here. And not only that, especially the work we've done has demonstrated that many people want it. Many people are enthusiastic, want to engage in this, see all the benefits around both decarbonisation, but also investing in homes and better quality homes. We, in the past, Carbon Corp have delivered a number of different projects, supported our members and other householders in the Greater Manchester area to retrofit their homes. In particular, one of the schemes we did was a collective scheme working with 10 householders. High quality works, we were able to manage and maintain the quality of the work. We were able to offer 0% interest loans thanks to some government support. And that was extremely effective with increasing take up. And in terms of the outcomes, we saw on average gas usage cut by 50%, by half, and bills up to £1,000 net savings. So there is a real impact there to be won. We've now moved on and we're just launching People Powered Retrofit, which is a new community benefit society, which enables us to do more retrofits and to scale the work we're doing to meet that demand, and also to replicate that work with other organisations around the UK. And we do have a share issue that's active at the moment, and I'll drop the link into the chat so people can pass it on and promote it. So if government isn't acting, a retrofit is possible and people want it, how does that fit with local authority action? How can local authorities get involved? Well, for me, I think there is some potential, lots of really great potential for public community or public commons partnerships. There's a new report just come out from Commonwealth around this. It's the idea of local authorities with their institutional heft and trusted status working with on-the-ground organisations, community organisations and social enterprises to benefit from their nimbleness and their on-the-ground engagement. We've seen collaborations like this all over, and we indeed work very closely in Greater Manchester with Andy Burnham and his team here on his retrofit task force. I think there's also opportunities here for a community wealth building approach, whereby local authorities recognise the power of their procurement, the power of the institutions that they work within, and the opportunity to create meaningful local economic development through retrofit. I have to say, I have to preface this though, with some kind of, we have to face up to the fact that local authorities have suffered a decade now of austerity and running down of their capacity. I was reading Owen Hathley's Red Metropolis book recently about the London County Council, with their architects department employing more than 1,500 people, including a great deal of architects. It is now, I have to say, quite rare for local authorities to employ any architects at all, and that is really a symptom of many years of running down of local authorities as the agents for change. That London County Council also had the benefits of a direct works team as well to carry out the works. I think that for local authorities to take advantage of this sector and to work within these public community partnerships, I think some of them need to rethink their approach to procurement, which in the past has too often been to outsource, to involve managing agents, and not to recognise the skills, capacity, and the assets that lie within kind of local authority boundaries. I think once a community wealth building approach is taken, and once those collaborations between community and common ownership organisations take place, I think there's tremendous amount of opportunity for local authorities to drive local economic development, and in doing so to deliver meaningful change around retrofit. So yeah, that's me. Thanks very much.
Amazing. As local government nerds, hearing about the power of procurement was pure joy. Really, I mean, fundamental. There's such an opportunity here to really revitalise local economies through basically that kind of community wealth building that you're talking about. So I'm going to do a couple of questions, and could you please keep them within?
Yes.
I'm going to give you 3 minutes because we're really, yeah. Okay, brilliant. So from Tony, what is the minimum time required to train a sufficiently large workforce and to ensure that there will be kind of sufficient quality control for the work. And so maybe a bit about your own experiences with training.
Yeah, and very
And
much
then-
as you mentioned with Charlie, our approach is to emphasize on the job training, not just in the classroom. And well, there isn't a simple answer to that, Tony, but what I would say is a long-term approach is required, that people need time, not just in the classroom, but on the job, gaining experience, gaining time. We were talking just yesterday with Devon County Council about retrofit coordinators and looking at a path of 2 to 3 years for that kind of skill set. There are others, lots of different skills and trades here with different time scales. That for me, there was a discussion about Untitled Britain. Great, we need a policy, but if we're going to rush this 4 years to do all social housing, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. We need a long-term approach, really.
Fantastic. And then the other question was, there seems to have been a change within local government around bringing things back in-house and that kind of community wealth building. How do you think we get councils to buy into it? Because people feel that it's a risk. If you're in a local government officer, you feel that there's a risk to doing it and you're putting your head above the parapet.
I really sympathise with local authorities. Andy Burnham's got a lot of ambition, but he hasn't got a lot of capacity, in terms of skills within the team. What I would say is there are a few things we can learn from. We can learn from the past and the Directs Works kind of legacy here and in the UK. And we used to build stuff. Local authorities used to build stuff and renovate stuff and refurbish stuff. And not that long ago, there are still officers that have memory of that. I'd also look abroad and look at models out there where this kind of thing is happening. I would also ask local authority officers and elected members to take a long, hard, critical look at the outcomes from these outsourced projects, because it may feel like things are happening, we're outsourcing work, but actually a legacy of jobs isn't happening. Often the schemes leave a trail of empty kind of scorched earth, really. The employment terms are poor, the training is lacking, and there are other ways that we can look at these things, look at the legacy of Carillion. They're not value for money ultimately, and when people look at them in the overall terms, they'll see that.
Fantastic. All right, we've got 5 minutes to go, so I'm gonna jump in now and kind of wrap up. Before I do, I'm going to give a plug to our NEF Supporters Network. If you like the sound of what we're talking about here today, and you'd like to get behind it, then something you can do is join something called the Supporters Network, NEF Supporters Network, from as little as £3 a month. Supporters donations help fund our work, including running events like this, and they allow us to plan further ahead into the future. So if we're going to build the kind of powerful national campaign to retrofit homes, we're going to need to build a kind of fighting campaign. And it'd be amazing if we could get your support. So if you're not a NEF supporter already, then please check it out, and there'll be a link in the chat to how you can become one. I'm going to quickly, with 5 minutes to kind of spare, before thanking all our guests for coming, rush through the kind of like practical campaigning strategy that we are working through as NEF. So I'm very lucky. I get to spend my day reaching out and having one-to-ones with local authority leaders and practitioners to try and build a broad coalition of people who have been doing retrofit, that we can come out and say, look at all the brilliant work we've done. Imagine if we had the funding to really scale this up, and imagine what it would do to my community to really scale this up. And so we're trying to get as many local authorities and as many Metro mayors signed up to the campaign as possible. But it's really important that as well as working with like elected officials and officers and people who are practitioners in retrofit, that we go and actually speak to people in our communities. And so we will also be running in November a specific community organizing element around this campaign. So we're coming both from the kind of top and from the bottom, because we think there has to be a public demand for this, but at the moment the public really don't know what retrofit means. So we're going to be producing a kind of campaigners organizing pack, which will be sending out and running trainings in November of how to kind of utilize them and use them. And it will include a kind of persuasive conversation that you can go and knock on doors in your own local community, on your own street, and have that conversation about what are people's housing conditions like, and have they ever heard of retrofit? And if they haven't, tell them what it is. And is this the kind of thing that you would want from your local authority? Is this the kind of thing that you would want to see implemented in your own neighbourhood? And we've done some kind of testing of it. We did it out on the estates of Battersea, and the kind of response was really interesting, because people really kind of opened up to talk about their own conditions and then to think through the kind of the way that this would change their lives. And, you know, it's like 90% of people were like, that sounds fantastic. Have I never heard of that before? Or, yeah, the council just gave me double glazing. It's changed a lot, but I still have this problem with damp and I still have high bills. So that's going to be part of the campaign that we do. So please keep an eye out. And the way that you can stay updated is by going onto our website, greathomesupgrades.org, and signing up, and you'll be given campaign updates on that. And then we really want to kind of scale this up leading up to the spring budget, because on October 27th, we'll get an idea about what the government is planning, and we'll get an idea about the kind of negotiation that we'll be entering into in terms of the civil society response to it. So from October 27th, we'll really be kind of articulating what our ground game will be across the country. And we want to try and just build as much energy as possible. We'll be kind of officially launching in October on the week of the 4th, so in a kind of week's time. So keep an eye out, and we'll be sending out different things that you can do, either sharing stuff online, putting it into local WhatsApp groups that you have, sharing it with, you know, different community organizations. We're working with organizations like Faith for the Climate, which kind of work with different faith groups across the country, and we'll be doing stunts like trying to get, you know, if you've got a church that doesn't have a retrofit, imagine in your own local community getting your church retrofitted and things like that. There are loads of things we can do to start to build that public pressure around making this part of the national agenda. Because look, if you're a green activist, it's very likely that you've done something on divestment. It's very likely that you've done something on pollution, but it's probably quite unlikely that you've ever done anything around decarbonising housing, despite the fact that it has this like huge impact. You know, 20% of our carbon emissions is coming from housing. We can do something to change it. And it's not just, you know, a bad news story, we're going to have to give something up. It's we can really transform people's living conditions and people's lives and create jobs. So we think this has to become like a real foundational pillar of any climate activism that's taking part. So I made it. We've got 1 minute left. I want to really, really thank the speakers for coming along. It was fantastic. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Miata. And you know, I'll send a little text to Jamie and congratulate him on his bookshelves. It was really, really great to have you, and really good to hear about what's actually happening at the moment. Because it's about unlocking. You know, think of what Leeds could do if Leeds was given the actual funding. You know, Leeds has been doing this under the conditions of austerity, and it's still been retrofitting homes. Imagine if it actually had a proper funding stream. So please do check out our website, sign up to the campaign, and do get ready, because we're about to get going, and this is going to be a real fight ahead. So take care, everyone, and it was a pleasure to have you on our call today.